Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So my introductions, feedback is greatly important. Feel free to reach out to me, and I have those links provided for you in this episode. All right, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Spreaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, just to name a few. So this episode is the part 2. And so what I'm going to start out is give all of my thoughts, and then I'm just going to read to you about the impact, about the historical impact and the history of it. Because I said the psychological, talking about that, I might save that for Wednesday, maybe. But I'm just going to talk about from the psychological impact from what reading and everything from my point of view. And, that'll pretty much cover the base. So anyway, here we go. Okay, so more of my thoughts, everything overall about the aspects of product placement. I think product placement, for the most part, is a staple of the aspects of a decade. And so sorry about that, the beeping alarm going off there. So, when product placement started in silent films, particularly in that silent era in the 1920s, and then, moving on from talkies to the 30s, 40s, and so forth, in the 1920s, it was all about the aspects of the revolution coming out of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, to me, for the most part, was all about the aspects of the realities of modern life. So in the Industrial Revolution, you had people working in factories being more prominent in people's lives, and then and then how that changes the state of being for a culture. So, before the Industrial Revolution, the society for the most part was agriculture, just farming, and you had big families, tending to the livestock, tending to the health and well-being of their production, where it's coming from, and they lived off of the land and so forth. And I'm not saying that there still wasn't prominent part of society, out of the Industrial Revolution. Of course it is, and that's even more, that goes on today. There's still people that live off of the land, and they are really sustainable that way. But my whole point here in bringing all that up, that's a quick change to go from being predominantly an agricultural nation to a fast-paced, industrialized society. And then with that, there's a lot of changes that comes from that. People start to, instead of living in the country, they want to live in the city. They start to, and then the aspects of working long, laborious jobs, long hours, and the aspects of safety and rules and regulations with safety. And then even the aspects of where women stand and the aspects of working having careers and so forth, and aspects of the revolutionizing how women's fashion, women's fashion are becoming more shorter, more revealing, instead of demure and genteel, as before then, and that was even more epitomized in the Victorian era, where women were very concealed and very just low key. And then in the 20s, when we get into the aspects of product placement, women were becoming more, trying to take a lot more risk, trying to, the aspects of the wild, roaring 20s, the single life, wild, lavish parties. That was a real thing. People were more in the aspects of capitalism and enjoying the aspects of capitalism. It's unfortunate the downside and the downfall that happened out of all of this with these vast changes of control and substance with aspects of capitalism. And so I think that consumerism was quite natural to be placed into films. And so that was a shine of time for how this different product placements in these movies, because it pinpoints to what is valuable to society. And so when we move on into movies like and that were in the 40s, on to blockbusters and so forth, they shape the aspects of what is valuable to the culture at that time. So, when we get into the 40s, 50s, 60s, what was valuable at that time wasn't valuable to what is today versus the other decades. So in the 40s, particularly in the 40s and 30s, it was all about escapism. So people were going through the Great Depression. People were going through the world wars. And so they were looking for cinema to be a sense of escapism. And so the neat part of having real world products placed into these movies, it gave people a sense of another aspect of looking at advertising in a different way. And that shaped the aspects of seeing marketing, seeing advertising as good fun, good times, and associating with that sort of mentality with it. And I think that goes into the lines of the aspect of the psychological input that product placement has on people. Now, these companies know what they're doing. We know what they're doing when they place certain products in these movies. They're trying to innate a sense of euphoria into people's minds, into what they think about when they see these products. And again, it innates the brand loyalty to people, I think. And I think that's the whole aspects of the psychological factors that are with subliminal messaging into product placement. And I think product placement in itself is subliminal messaging, because it innates the senses to see something that's familiar, and then it's a chain of events in the logic of thinking about the product and so forth, and making the decision if they want to buy it or not, or how they feel about that. And then in the research that I found, there is some when I mean by this, there is gray areas to this, to where you get the sense of ethics and working in the aspects of making sure that the companies are presenting themselves in good faith when they're placing products into certain movies, television shows, and so forth. Now, is it eliciting for people to buy certain things, to feel a certain way, and false advertising when they see these things? Or is it just simply a new creative thing to get your foot in the door, or get these companies' foot in the door, and to letting people know these sort of products are on the market. And when we evaluate things and think about these things, I think that's a huge shape into the aspects of how advertising changes the way our society is looked at. Now, some people think that advertising shouldn't have such of a focal point into a culture, and that's the bedrock of ruining a society when you're just primarily focused in on the consumer good. You're not focusing on the overall cohesive aspects of your place with products and so forth. It's a time and place for all that. But people have and then people have other thoughts about that. But for the most part, I think that product placement is, again, a sign of change and a sign of where a society is going with how they think of themselves how they think of themselves and goods, and how that shapes people's sort of mentality about what they buy. All right, with all that said, I'm going to move on to the aspects of more details of the history of product placement and wrap it up. Here we go. And of course, sources will be provided for you in this episode. So this is just a brief history of product placement. So early days, as I was saying, in the 1920s, the first such characteristics of product placement is Coca-Cola or Ford T-model cars. These placements were less about advertising and more about creating an authentic backdrop for the story. And see, these brands, particularly with Coca-Cola and Ford, the Ford model, Ford T. Now, what did they cultivate, particularly in the 1920s, about the American staple of how people were, what people found comfort in. People found comfort in the Fords because they got, instead of before then, people going around either on foot or with horse or so forth. Ford in itself, he changed the whole staple of how the aspects of American life can change through automotive. And that was very creative for its time, and people had a certain excitement and loyalty to that movement of you can go anywhere you want to with the Model T. You can travel, you can do this, you can do that. You're not just stagnant in one place. You can actually roam free. And then the aspects of the American highway and the traveling the unknown started to become more and more prevalent. And Coca-Cola is American staple, and the innovation of soda jerks and so forth, and the nostalgia feeling of Coke, that gives in itself another aspects of nostalgia to people. So radio and television. As radio and television gained prominence, so did product placement. So like I Love Lucy, the staplement of product placements like Vita Vegemin, and making a joke out of that. And then Lucille Ball, she was a craftsman in the aspects of comedy. So she really shaped the aspects of women being funny, and the aspects of that in itself is a telling staple of its time too, with the aspects of product placement, where people were in that wave in the 50s about health and well-being, and then, making a mockery of it. Hey, this can cure what ails you. It's again pinpointing to the aspects of snake oil salesmen when they would say, hey, when there was a lot of ads being ran, particularly in the Victorian era, saying, hey, if you do this, if you take this kind of drink, or you had this kind of concoction, it'll make you feel better. It'll make you give that pep in your step. It'll cure what ails you. And that's something to be said about that. And that, again, is a staple of its time, of how things were progressing and how people were viewing themselves in the aspects of their culture, and how comedy was being a storyteller for that. And I Love Lucy was a really good example of that, and a really good example of the aspects of modernity and innovative change in society. So the golden age of Hollywood, glamour and brands. Hollywood golden era from the 50s to the 30s. Saw a surge in product placements at luxury brands like Tiffany and Company, Cadillac Tiffany Company, with Breakfast at Tiffany's, and the Cadillac Rolex viewed for screen time. Audrey Hepburn's, as I mentioned, the sunglasses in Breakfast at Tiffany's, or James Bond, Aston Martin's, the DB5 are etched in collective memory. So what these two brands innate a sense of class and sophistication, and that's another sense of escapism with movies. So subtle versus blunt. So filmmakers experience with different approaches. Some placements were subtle, a pack of Lucky Strikes usually left on the table, while others were more overt, like Marilyn Monroe sipping Coca-Cola and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. So on the rise of television, soap operas and brands, as I mentioned about soap operas. So soap operas, where their daily episodes became a breeding ground for product placement. And then soap operas and game shows were cultivated and very innovative at this time, with experimenting with the aspects of product placement and advertising, and how that shaped the aspects of the shows and the game shows, and then what people thought about these products and how they merged together. All right, characteristics would discuss real-life products during kitchen scenes or while doing laundry. Brands like Procter & Gamble capitalized on this by captivating the audience. Game shows and prizes. Game shows took it a step further. Contestants won refrigerators, washing machines, and toasters, all courtesy of sponsors. So the audience associated these brands with aspiration and success. So, blockbusters. So in the modern landscape, in the 1980s and 90s, they saw raw blockbuster films collaborating with brands like E.T. with Reese's Pieces, Top Gun, and Ray-Ban Aviators. And they all these different movies, they staple a sense of style and imagery with these particular brands, and that also shapes the aspects of how people view the mentality of certain aspects of products too. So we get Man in Black and Ray-Ban wafers. These partnerships blur the line between fiction and reality. So TV series and subtle integration. So TV series like Friends and Sex and the City, and Friends and Sex and the City was specifically capitalist driven. So, Sex and the City is a really good example of that. It was all about Barney's, Tiffany's, Prada, Fendi, these very luxurious fashion brands. We get some Starbucks here because they live in New York, and that's the mentality or the stereotype that, some stereotypes are driven in truth. It comes from a truthful place. But the aspects of, living in New York, it's all about coffee shops and so forth. And so these things, they cultivate an imagery of what people think when they see these brands, and if they associate it with their favorite television shows and so forth, they're going to feel a certain way about this and feel more familiar instead of distant from the brand. All right, and then, it gives an example like Central Perk's Coffee Shop or Carrie Bradshaw, Manolo Blanc's with the shoes. These were touchstones for everything and the aspects of product placement. So digital age and new challenges. And the digital age, product placement extends beyond screens, video games, music videos, and even social media influencers subtly endorse products. So brands now navigate the delicate balance between authenticity and commercialism. I think a really good example about this is crumble cookies. So there was a lot of controversy about these influencers promoting, saying how good these cookies are and eating them. And some influencers, particularly on TikTok and Instagram and so forth, all they do is just eat food and promote it. And then it was a lot of, like I said, recently it was a lot of controversy with Crumble Cookie doing this, where I guess they had war with saying, oh, these exclusive cookies are here and you can try them, but they actually weren't really exclusive, or all that. It was hard to find and people lining up for them and then everything. And when they did get it, it wasn't up to snuff. It wasn't, the product wasn't good, and people were getting sick and so forth. And so that goes along the lines of whether the ethic reasoning behind it. What's the thought process all about that? And so that in itself, it makes you wonder about the aspects of advertising in the day and age in which we live in now, or how impactful the influence trend is going in society. And so it's one of those things you take everything, but you should take all of that with a grain of salt. But at the same time, it's one of those balances is the influencer should have, some accountability about everything, and then so should the advertiser, and so should the company. And that's something to think about too, with the aspects of how advertisement is seen in our society as of today. So, audience perception. Some viewers embrace placements as part of the storytelling, while others find them distracting. So, notable examples: Castaway and FedEx. So, Tom Hanks' survival saga prominently features FedEx packages, which is symbolizing the connection and the hope of him getting out of there. So, Wayne's World and Pepsi. The iconic Wayne's World scene hilariously mocks blatant placements while promoting Pepsi. Stranger Things and Eggo waffles. So, this is nostalgia again here. Eleven's love for Eggo waffles becomes a pop culture phenomenon. So it says, in summary, product placement has evolved from subtle nudges to strategic collaborations. As media consumption patterns shift, brands continue to find innovative ways to embed themselves in our favorite stories. So whether it's a can of Coke or a pair of Nikes, these placements shape our perception and influence our choices. So, it says, when you watch a movie or binge a series, keep an eye out. You might just spot a familiar logo or catchphrase cleverly tucked into the narrative fabric. So, I'd like to know what your thoughts are about. Everybody, feel free to reach out to me about product placement in its place in our society. You think it's good or better, or it's just a means to an end? Whatever your thoughts are, I'd like to hear them. So this reaches the end of the Hovering Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care out there. Bye-bye for now.